Hello V, hello everyone else, and welcome to Gaping Chasm. Today I'm going to do a bookish type video that I've been thinking about doing for a while, so I'm really stoked to actually do it today. Basically, I'm going to be going through complete series that I have on my shelf that I've actually finished. I have a really bad track record of starting series and not finishing them, and not because they're bad, but just because I get like really easily distracted. I feel like if I'm able to complete a series and feel so urgently driven to complete the series that it actually gets done, I think that's a really great mark of recommendation. And it is the case with like all of these series that you're gonna see here today, that I tend to like throw them at people that are like, I need a book idea. I'm like, take this, you know. I do have a couple parameters for how I'm doing it. So for it to count as a complete series, it needs to A, be completely published, and I need to have completely read it. This does not count for like spin-offs or like shared world books. So if it's like a trilogy that is part of a larger series, and the larger series I haven't read all of it, or it isn't all published, that trilogy still counts as a completed series. The same goes for if there are like companion books and those companion books aren't out yet, or I haven't read those companion books. As long as I've read the core series, like the plot based part of that series, it's going to count as a completed series. There's a series on here that the author has hinted there might be a fourth book, but there's nothing set in stone, so I'm going to count it as a complete series because I really don't know what's happening there. And these books are in no particular order. I recommend all of them, and I'm going to talk a little bit about each of them, what they're about, and who might be the type of people to enjoy them. But honestly, they're not like categorized by like my favorite first or my favorite last. They're just the order that I pulled them off my shelves. And I did only pull them off my main shelves. I do have a small shelf over there as well as a bunch of books in my closet and in the basement. I did not pull any books from those shelves just because I don't actively think about or talk about those books as much. That includes Harry Potter. I do have a soft spot for that series, but I do keep it on one of my other shelves because I just don't actively think about or promote Harry Potter, especially after everything that J.K. Rowling has said. It's a very weird like category right there. Let's get to it. First of all, we have the Farseer Trilogy by Robin Hobb. This is the first in her like shared universe mega series, The Realm of the Elderlings. The first three do completely stand on their own, and they are the original three. They are so very good. I think I often, the way I explain how much I love these books is, I would say it's my favorite epic fantasy trilogy. If you take it as like one complete, you know, if you take it all together, it's my favorite epic fantasy trilogy, even though individually they're not my favorite epic fantasy books. That title belongs to Name of the Wind and the Wise Man's Fear. When Doors of Stone come out, maybe that will become my favorite trilogy, but until that day, they can't hold that distinction. But yes, the Farseer Trilogy absolutely does. They are phenomenal. They're very quiet books, by which I mean there's a lot of care taken to describing small intricate things, and they're very beautiful because of it. They also are really engaging. The characters are the absolute heart of this series. They're all very complicated characters. They're all characters that you find yourself getting very frustrated at. There's a lot of moralizing in the book and debating like who is right, who is wrong. And it's really lovely. The whole trilogy is narrated by Fitz. Fitz Chivalry Farseer is the bastard son of the crown prince. When he's discovered, his father basically steps down as crown prince, goes to live in exile, and Fitz is raised in the castle, and he is raised by a man named Burrich, who is the stable master. And then when he turns a certain age, he's approached by the king as well as a man named Chade, and he has then begun training as an assassin, which hence the name Assassin's Apprentice. Oh my god, I recommend this series to everyone. It is unlike any other fantasy that I've ever read. It's not only intricate in like its writing, but the details about like wilderness survival and just like that kind of stuff is really in depth, but not like annoyingly so. So it's really cool. It's also, I would say, a rather feminist tale, which, especially considering I think the first book came in 95. I don't feel like there's a lot of fantasy from that era that puts women on the same pedestal as men. Obviously it's not super inclusive, although the character of the Fool, I would argue, is explicitly queer. I would have to argue that because I think you could also say he's explicitly not, but that's a discussion for a different day. But he's a queer character in text, as well as, I don't want to say non-binary, but like gender is not a concern he has, but he uses he, him pronouns. So it's a little inclusive in that way, and I love the Fool. He's such a great character. He's one of the characters that, as you watch grow, his relationship with Fitz is just so important to me. So it's a much more inclusive feminist type of epic fantasy than I was expecting it to be. Like really, like it's hard to explain, but like the same amount of agency is given to the male and female characters, and there really aren't, it doesn't really fall on most of the like tropes and stereotypes that I think a lot of epic fantasy falls on even today, but like especially around like the late 90s. So I would recommend it to anyone who either is a newcomer to fantasy, because I think it's not too complicated that you can't pick it up and understand, you know, everything that's going on. The magic system is simple but unique and engaging, and the world is also not like, you don't need a lot of info dumping. It's pretty understandable. I would also recommend it to people who are big fans of fantasy but haven't read, you know, anything by Robin Hobb, you know, haven't read this series. I would recommend it to people who are kind of tired of the same old and really want to give just something new a whirl, and honestly, you're gonna fall in love with these characters. They're just phenomenal. Fitz is one of the greatest first-person narrations, if not the greatest first-person narration that I've ever read, and yeah, I love these books. Next up, we have the Hazelwood series, I guess is what it's called. I do actually have two editions because I'm that person. The American and the UK editions. I really like these books. It's just the two. First book is The Hazelwood. These are by Melissa Albert. I actually listened to this on audiobook the first time I read it when I was abroad, and it is a really magical book. The writing is gorgeous. The original fairy tales in it are just mind-blowingly amazing, and both the first and the second, so it's a complete duet. There is a companion book coming out next year which is going to have the original fairy tales in it, and to say I am excited is an understatement. I am so excited. These books, I'm not gonna say much about book 2, but this one is about a girl named Alice Proserpine. Her grandmother became really famous for authoring this really rare book of fairy tales, and like it made her grandmother super famous. Alice's mother ran away from home, basically took Alice, ran away from home, and has kind of lived on the road with Alice for 16 years. I believe she's 16. So Alice and her mother are really close, and by living on the road I mean they do have like permanent addresses, but they move around a lot, and it seems like her mother is hiding from something. When Alice's grandmother passes away, things are kind of set into motion, and Alice's mother ends up going missing. Alice seeks out the help of a schoolmate, Ellery Finch, whom I love. He's such a great character, and there's pieces of him that feel very much like pieces of me, so I'm just like a little, you know, wigged out by that, but I love it. So she seeks out Ellery Finch's help to try to learn what the fairy tales are, because she can't seem to get a copy herself, and to kind of uncover her and her mother's past. While she's doing it, it seems as if the stories in the fairy tales are coming alive, and she's kind of running from them and trying to uncover a mystery at the same time. Such a good book. I was a little let down by book 2 just because I had loved this one so much, but I did still enjoy book 2. I don't want to say it was a bad book. It just wasn't as good as book 1. I think because I really liked the way book 1 ended, and book 2 had to reset a little bit of the ending because I think it was originally planned to be a standalone. I would recommend this series to, if you liked the Mortal Instruments series, you'd probably enjoy this series. If you like fairy tales, you'll definitely enjoy the fairy tale aspect of it because they are phenomenal. Also, the writing itself is just gorgeous. I've recommended this to a lot of people who don't read YA fantasy, and they've thoroughly enjoyed it. So I would say if you've just wanted to dabble in the genre, maybe give it a look or two, I would say go with this. It's very addictive writing, very hard to put down, and the first one has such a, I don't want to say unconventional ending, but an ending that I feel like is underutilized in YA fantasy, and it is really well done in this book. The Rhaenyra Revelations by Michael J. Sullivan. Oh my goodness, these books mean so much to me. I full on, oh, $1. I went to a book convention. No, it wasn't even a book convention. It was C2E2. I went to C2E2 just to get him to sign this book. I'm not even kidding. I love this series. These books, so it's 2 books per bind up, which is why they're so thick. Oh my god, they're so good. These books were my gateway drug into adult epic fantasy. I read them back in high school. I don't know, probably like sophomore, junior year, I want to say. I originally actually read the first book on my Kindle, fell so in love with it that I had to get the rest of them in hard copy immediately, and I did, and I regret nothing. I haven't read them in a while, so I hope that they hold up because they seriously do mean so much to me. This series starts very fantasy light, and by the last book, which is called, the final book is called Persepolis, and by the time we get to book 6, it's epic fantasy. It's full-scale epic fantasy, and it's a great build-up to that. Another really cool thing about this series is that it was originally self-published, and I would kill to get my hands on the original editions. I think that'd be really cool. The first book in the series is called The Crown Conspiracy, and it is one of the greatest setups for a book that I've ever read. I just love it so much. So Hadrian and Royce, they're a thief and a mercenary pair, and they basically go and do, not odd jobs, but they do jobs around the kingdom, the country, all that. They're hired to steal something from the castle, and in doing so, they're actually set up and framed as murderers of the king. While they're rotting in prison, the princess comes to them and basically makes a deal with them to free them as long as they steal her brother, who's going to be the king. So they steal him, and they have a quest to take him to a place, and then, you know, a further quest after that. But it is so good. There's a lot of questioning about like what people's motivations are, especially the princess. There's a lot of motivation, and also like who actually killed the king, why set up Royce and Hadrian specifically, like all of this great stuff. But the real highlight of this series, without a doubt, is Royce and Hadrian's relationship. They're such a great duo. The chemistry just comes off the page. They just have a lot of great like buddy cop chemistry between them. The humor in this series too is just like phenomenal and off the charts. I have so much fun when I read these books. And again, another series I just cannot recommend enough. And I feel like so Michael J. Sullivan has since published, he publishes like occasionally books in the prequel series to this, which I read the first couple in and didn't enjoy. Then he's also got Legends of the First Empire, I think is what it's called, which is his series that's kind of made him rather famous. Or not famous, but you know, much more known than this series has. And I didn't enjoy, I read the first book in that too, and I didn't enjoy it either, but I legitimately adore this to death. And I feel like no one ever talks about this series that he wrote. This was my gateway into adult epic fantasy, so I strongly recommend it if you are looking to get into that genre or looking to get back into that genre. I say it's adult epic fantasy, but only because of the scope and like what they're dealing with isn't something you see in like younger genres necessarily. And also the characters are like adults. There's not really a question about that. But it's not explicit. It's not like gory. It's something that could be enjoyed definitely by younger readers, YA audiences. It's just adult epic fantasy because that's really the character ages. Yeah, if you're looking to get into the genre of adult epic fantasy, or if you're just looking for a new epic fantasy series to read, one that has a lot of really great organic growth and a really great buddy cop heart to it, I'd say go with these. The Iron Face series by Julie Kagawa. I have the first 4 here. Technically, the first 3 are a trilogy. The 4th one is a companion to the first 3. And then there is 1 or 2 companion books, and then there's another trilogy about the main character's children or child, and then I think there's going to be another new trilogy published starting next year. Are we caught up? I have read these 4 obviously, and then I've also read the first, or the 1 companion book that was short stories, and the first 2 in the original spin-off trilogy. I did not like the second book in the spin-off trilogy. I in fact hated the second book in the spin-off trilogy, so I gave up on that series. I didn't care. I didn't need it tainting it. The original Iron Fae trilogy plus book 4 are some of the best YA paranormal romance I have ever read. These were definitely my first fairy books that I read and thoroughly enjoyed. I actually picked it up because a librarian recommended it to me. Yeah, she was like, you'd like this, and I also handed it off to my close friend. She also loves this series. It was one of the series we bonded over. And they also just, I think it was their 10-year anniversary. Was it 10 years? Yeah, it was their 10-year anniversary this year, so they're getting new covers, which are really gorgeous, although I have such a soft spot for the original covers. This series is brilliant. If you, well, we'll get to who I recommend it for, but it is a story about fairies. And our main character, Megan Chase, her brother goes missing and is replaced by, wow, I don't remember what kind of fairy it is. It's like a major type of fairy. You'd recognize the name. It's the type of fairy that, like in fairy tales, replaces babies all the time. Her brother ends up replaced by one of these fairies, and she starts to just get really curious about like what's going on. Like there's weird things happening. She starts seeing somebody kind of out of the corner of her eye. Her best friend is acting really strange. Turns out she's actually part fairy, and she ends up going to the Never Never, which is fairy world, and getting embroiled in that and trying to save her brother. I don't want to give away too much. She goes on this quest with her best friend, who she did not realize was Puck, you know, the fairy from Shakespeare, and she meets Ash, who's the prince of the Winter Court. And to say Ash is an amazing character is not enough. He was one of my first literary crushes. I adore Ash. He's such a great character, and I adore Ash and Megan, and I adore Puck. Like such a soft spot for this trilogy. And it's called the Iron Fae because not only does she have to deal with fairies, but there's a threat of iron fae, which iron is dangerous to fairies. Like it's their major weakness, and the fact that there is this new like race of fae type creatures that are not only made of iron and able to like access iron is a huge threat to the fairy world and the Never Never. So that's also a major part of the plot. This series is super angsty, so if you want like a lot of angst, this series has you covered, especially book 4. I still will reread parts of book 4 when I just need to like hit that like angst button in my brain. I recommend this series to people who love YA paranormal romance. I know it's not a genre that's published as much of anymore. It's sort of fallen to the wayside in lieu of just YA fantasy. This is one of the OG series that I strongly recommend. It is phenomenal. I also recommend it if you're really into fairy stories. It's not as in-depth as other, you know, series out there with the fairy lore, but I think it's the only one I've ever come across that really does a lot of focus on the iron aspect, and I really enjoy that. I thought it was really cool. The romance aspect of this paranormal romance is great. I think you can tell I was a big fan of it. I haven't read it in a while. It has probably dated itself just because it is a technology-based magic system for part of it, but I am looking forward to rereading it soon because, yeah, I mean, 10-year anniversary, that's crazy, guys. That's so crazy. And I think I read it in like 2011, 2012, so almost 10 years ago. Okay, now we're getting into the part of the video. It's going to be some of my most owned series, I have the most copies of these books. So not only do I have like one complete edition of these series, I have as many as 4 probably. You're gonna see also 2 of my favorite authors, Sarah J. Maas and Cassandra Clare. I have a lot of their books. First up, we have the Court of Thorns and Rose series by Sarah J. Maas. I'm not breaking the rules by putting these books on there, okay? I'm not. The original trilogy was meant to just be a trilogy, and it is a complete story, okay? There's like threads to later books, and she's writing those later books. But I'm going to say the original trilogy is complete because it is, okay? If you are at all involved in the YA, if you're at all involved in like the online book community, you've heard of this author and you've heard of this series. And maybe you've heard good things and maybe you've heard bad things, but I adore this series. I adore it so very much. The first book is great. Amazing even. The second book is world-changingly amazing. I cannot express how perfect this book was for me when it came to me, and I was reading these books as they came out. I have pretty much without a flaw read her books the same month they released, including book 1 in the Throne of Glass series, because yes, I pre-ordered that one. Not to flex and be a total hipster, but I was one of the first. But this book came to me at just the perfect time. I was struggling with a lot of just mental health stuff, and this book, Farah in this book, is struggling not with the same problems, not really at all. She's like PTSD, honestly, but this book is all about healing and growing through healing and just it's really beautiful, and it sort of held my hand in a really hard time. So I cannot praise this book enough. Even if you're not having a hard time, I think it is still a really beautiful, wonderful book. And everyone praises this as like her best book, and I mean, I have to agree. It is just phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. I would say, I mean, her new one, Crescent City, House of Earth and Blood, is also up there and just being like technically one of the best books she's written. But I would say this is also tied for just being super well written. The first one is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, also mixed with East of the Sun, West of the Moon, which is a fairy tale I really love and I love to see adapted. It's about a girl, Farah. She's a huntress. She kind of lives on the edge of the human kingdom. There's like a wall that divides the human world from the fairy world, and she lives on an island where there's a very small portion of it dedicated to humans and the rest is all fairies, or fae. She is a huntress for her family, and she's out hunting food, and she kills a fairy while she's doing this. The liege lord of that fairy, Tamlin, comes in, basically hunts her down, and says that because she killed the fairy, she is kind of like, she owes him a life. So he kind of kidnaps her. She agrees to it, I believe. Like, she agrees to it because she really doesn't have another option. So she's basically kidnapped. He brings her to his court, the Spring Court, and it's, you know, a love story. They fall in love. The first half of it is really her like falling for him and her learning to live in like this world, and also learning not to just hate all the fairies. Like, they're not all evil, and it's more complicated than all that. And also just getting involved. There's like a curse not just on the Spring Court, but on all of the fae courts on this island that have to do with a really powerful fairy named Amarantha, who is terrifying. So the first half is her falling in love with him, and then around the halfway point, Amarantha basically calls in the curse and steals Tamlin away. So Farah has to go on a quest to rescue him and the rest of the world, basically. It is, like I said, an amazing book. It is so good. These are fantasy. They're romance books as well. And I would say they're not like predominantly romance or predominantly fantasy. They're a very good mix of both. And the fantasy in the series, it's there in book 1, but it is super there in books 2 and 3. And 3 actually has a war in it, and it is one of my favorite fictional wars, if that makes sense. I just think it's so well written. I adore it. And it's really a good war. Like, violent, but good. It's not just a romance. It's not just a fantasy. This is a new adult series. Sometimes it is shelved in YA. It is finally going to be shelved in adult now moving forward. They have new covers, which are gorgeous, and I plan on getting eventually. But it is technically new adult, so do expect explicit scenes. Not so much in book 1, if I remember correctly. Oh, I guess it has the warning contains mature content. But I don't remember that much in this one. Book 2 definitely takes it up a level. If you're not comfortable reading explicit sex scenes, don't pick it up. Or just be prepared and skip over those scenes, which I think you absolutely can. They're not like integral to the plot. There are very few books where the sex scenes are integral to the plot. Like, they're important in that they happened, but you don't need to know the details. So, you know, up to you. And you saw this coming, guys. The Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas. Yeah, I have multiple copies of the series. I am using my UK paperbacks because they're a lot lighter. Throne of Glass. Again, if you're part of the online book community, you definitely heard of this series many a times. It's been very big. I would also credit it as one of the books that really started leaning the trend in YA away from paranormal romance and into the fantasy genre. And can I just say, this is the best thing that's ever happened to YA. I like paranormal romance, but I hated dystopian, and honestly I kind of hate some of the paranormal romance that was coming out. But fantasy, I find myself just adoring in general. So Throne of Glass, what is it about? Selena Sardothian is like the kingdom's greatest assassin, and she's been imprisoned for 2 years? I just reread these books, I should remember. I believe it is 2 years. It might only be 1 year. She's been imprisoned in like a salt mine as a slave. The crown prince comes and basically recruits her to be his champion in a competition where the winner of the competition is going to be the king's champion. And that's what the first book is about. It's the competition. It's her also unraveling this mystery at the castle. There is somebody killing the champions. She obviously wants to survive. There's a lot going on. This series, like the Rhaenyra Revelation series is sort of starts with Fantasy Light, and by the last book, Kingdom of Ash, which is a honker, just shy of 1,000 pages. By the time you get to Kingdom of Ash, you have gone from being just like a low-key, like a book set in a fantasy world but not too much going on, to like an epic, full-scale war novel set in a fantasy world, and it's, you know, amazing. I loved this book. I love this whole series. This is one of the series that like defined my reading patterns for a very long time. I recommend this series to pretty much anyone who likes YA. I think it's kind of hard to avoid this series. It's not everyone's cup of tea. I know a lot of people just don't enjoy it, and that's totally cool. A lot of people find it's too tropey. Again, totally cool. I personally don't think it's very tropey. It definitely does have some tropes, but maybe it was because at the time I was reading it, there weren't that many books with these tropes on the market, at least in my sphere. The biggest weak point in this series is lack of diversity. Pretty much all the characters are like white or white adjacent, and it's frustrating on that level. It has a good balance of powerful female and male characters, all with a lot of agency, so that is good, but I mean, when they're all white characters, I don't know, it's weird. It also has very minimal LGBTQ plus representation. Yeah, it's not great on that level. It is something that the author has heard the fans say, and you can kind of see the more books that come out, the more that she is actively trying to put it in there. So like, kudos for that. It is good to see her trying and including more. Her most recent book, Crescent City, A House of Earth and Blood, has a lot more queer characters, has a lot more characters of color. Still not great like in regards to like what you could be doing, but it's something. So, you know, there's that. The lack of diversity is frustrating while reading. This series is YA, whereas the A Court of Thorns and Roses series is definitely for more mature readers. The leader in the series there are like mature scenes, but they're never like explicit. They're just like risque, you know. It's also much more fantasy than it is romance. There's a romance. She is a romance leaning writer, but it definitely is much heavier on the fantasy aspect. And I would say if you're, again, interested in getting into fantasy at all as a genre, this wouldn't be a bad place to start, because it does sort of let you in on the shallow end of the fantasy pool, and you get out and you're like the 11-foot end of the pool, just treading water, enjoying this beautifully huge fantasy world. And bonus points, I mean, obviously all of these book series that I'm showing you are complete. Duh, that's what part of the like gimmick of this video, but waiting for books in the Throne of Glass series to publish was one of the most agonizing experiences. My one really close friend can vouch for me. I basically shoved the first 3 books at her and I was like, okay, read them so that we can wait together and just suffer together. And then we did, and not only that, but she gave it to her mother, and her mother was like suffering with us. We all suffered together. It was great. Another author I have a million copies of, not just like a million books of, but like multiple editions of all her books, is Cassandra Clare. And her OG series is The Mortal Instruments. Oh my god, guys. I'm a huge fan. I'm a huge fan. I've been a huge fan since, oh god, like 6th grade. I remember picking up a copy of City of Bones from the school library and just not knowing, maybe it was 7th grade, but just not knowing what to expect and just being so blown away. This was definitely my first urban fantasy type book series. I mean, paranormal romance kind of lives in that genre, but this is much more urban fantasy. I don't even know how to express it, but oh god, this book swept me up, just completely swept me up. There's only a few books that have done that in my entire life. It's like this one, Percy Jackson. Just, I pull them on accident and then I'm obsessed forever. Again, you've probably heard of this series or one of the many series related to the Shadowhunters world, because there are many. You really can't avoid it, and I would say don't avoid it. I'd say give it a try. It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. It's a lot of people's cup of tea, but it may not be yours, and that's okay. I would say if you give it a try to this series and don't like it, check out the Infernal Devices, which is actually going to be the next series I'm going to show you. So the Mortal Instruments series. Originally it was a trilogy and it's been expanded to 6 books. I say you could probably read them as 2 separate trilogies because the original tale does end in book 3 very nicely. First book follows, well, they all follow. The first book is about Clary Frey. She is just a regular, I think, 16-year-old. It's so weird how young they are. In my head, they age up too. She arrives home one day to find that her mother is missing and that her apartment is in shambles, and it seems to be that it was like some sort of an attack. Oh wait, that's a really bad description. Okay, let me try to describe it again. That is all true, but that happens like a couple chapters in. So the book starts with Clary going to a club, and while she's there, she sees people that no one else can see, and she follows them and finds them killing a thing, a demon, but she doesn't know what it is. And she kind of like loses it. She's like, what the F is happening? And from there, she tries to like learn more about like what's going on. She's very curious about it all. Lo and behold, her mother goes missing and has been attacked. She gets involved with one of the people that she saw that night. His name is Jace, and he tells her all about the shadow world and that she herself is a shadow hunter, which is a demon hunter just like him. And then the book takes off. I'm not doing a very good job describing this book, and I'm so sorry. The back of it doesn't describe it super well either. But basically, demon hunters, shadow world, which is like werewolves, vampires, warlocks, fairies. Clary finds herself involved in it, finds out she is a shadow hunter even though she's never had any of the training, finds out her mother has been lying to her entire life, and yeah, questing, adventures. It's awesome. The first book really focuses on trying to get her mother back, and in doing so gathers itself into a much larger story that, you know, expands into a whole universe, but you know. This series, again, I recommend it to everyone who reads YA. I think it's just a staple you should at least try. There's a reason it's so popular. The whole Shadowhunters world has pretty good representation, especially for LGBTQ plus characters. It's one of those series that is just so in your face about it, and it's kind of one of those series where you want to go in sort of expecting everyone to be queer until confirmed straight kind of thing. Does that make sense? Like, it's got great representation. The first book introduces Magnus, who is iconic. He's one of the most iconic YA characters, and well, anyways, I could wax on about Magnus forever, but yes, the series is great if you want a lot of queer representation and just LGBTQ plus representation from all across the spectrum, especially further series as you go. Like the Dark Artifices is just like, it's fantastic. Another Cassandra Clare series, and my favorite from her, and probably one of my favorite trilogies, the Infernal Devices. This series gets the love triangle 100% right. I don't know why my phone went off, but this series, oh, because yep, it thinks I'm saying Siri. This book trilogy, this trilogy gets the love triangle 100% right. It's so good. It breaks your heart at every level and repairs your heart at every level too. It's just brilliant. It's the same kind of idea as the Mortal Instruments. Tessa she thinks she's a normal girl, and then she's sort of inducted into the shadow world, except she is not a shadow hunter, not exactly. She's a shapeshifter, which is weird because it's like, is she a warlock? Is she not? Like, what is she? So there's a lot of mystery around Tessa and how she's able to shapeshift, but she's basically kept prisoner by these two crazy women, and Shadowhunters, Will and Jem, come and rescue her, and they bring her to the London Institute. And yeah, there's a huge mystery about who she is, and also regarding her brother who has gone missing, and she actually came to London to look for him. Really good trilogy, really tightly written as well. You read the last page of the series and you just feel so absolutely complete. I love this trilogy so much. It's also steampunk. I love steampunk. There's not enough steampunk out there. Or not enough steampunk I enjoy out there. I recommend this even more than the Mortal Instruments trilogy. It could definitely be read standing alone. You don't need to know anything else about the Shadowhunters books or the world. You don't have to read more before or after. If you just want to read this trilogy, I say go for it, because it is really intense, really greatly written. And yeah, having that really tight cyclical story is just something I love seeing in literature, and something that I strive to be able to write as well. I recommend this for anyone who's a big fan of steampunk. Again, I don't think there's enough good steampunk out there on the market. Also for anyone who is interested in like urban fantasy, I think it really fits that bill still as well. If you want to try to get into the Shadowhunters universe world of books, this is a place you could definitely start. If you're daunted by the size of the Mortal Instruments series, this is the one to go with. It's just as great an introduction as City of Bones is. And then we have the Dark Artifices trilogy, featuring 2 of the Waterstones exclusive editions. Sadly, I never got Lady Midnight because I was dumb about it. I was like, oh, shipping to the US is going to be so expensive. It's not. It's really affordable, like if you're doing it sparingly. Someday I'll have that copy. Another Shadowhunter book, obviously by Cassandra Clare. All of her Shadowhunter series, this is my least favorite, and I don't know why. I just didn't connect with it the same way I connected with her other series. It's still really good. I still recommend it. These are all chonkers. These are like her biggest books, I think. I don't even think her most recent one is this thick. This is also the hardest one to sum up. I'm just gonna read the back of this one. In a secret world where half-angel warriors called Shadowhunters are sworn to fight demons, Parabody is a sacred word. A Parabody is your best friend and your battle partner. Parabody can be anything to each other, but they can never fall in love. Emma Carstairs is a Shadowhunter, the best in her generation. Together with her Parabody, Julian Blackthorn, she patrols the streets of Los Angeles, where fairies, the most powerful of supernatural creatures, teeter on the edge of open war with Shadowhunters. When bodies, both fairy and human, turn up bearing marks that match those found on Emma's own murdered parents, an uneasy alliance is formed. This is Emma's chance for revenge and Julian's chance to get back his brother, a prisoner of the fairy courts. All they have to do is solve the murders within 2 weeks, and before the murderer targets them. So that was a far better description than I can ever give for this book, because there's just so much going on. The thing that this series doesn't mention is how big the Blackthorn family is, and how big the cast of this book is, and how just much you fall in love with all of them. I love the Blackthorns. I do. I love them. They're not my favorite Shadowhunter family. I think that belongs to the Lightwoods, but they're up there. I would recommend this. This is another good place to start with Shadowhunters if you want to be thrown more fully into the world. Both Clockwork Angel and City of Bones kind of let you slowly get your way into it, which could be really plotting for some readers, but this one just throws you right into it. Emma is a Shadowhunter. Everyone in the book that's a narrator is a Shadowhunter or involved in the Shadowhunter world in some way. But if you are looking for something that has a lot more intricacy right off the bat, this is the one to probably start with. Mortal Instruments is a very simple story going in, like, again, because you take so much time kind of getting into the world, it's a lot simpler. Clockwork Angel is a simpler story, but it's smaller scale feeling story than either this one or City of Bones, so it fits better. It's not one I would recommend to every YA reader the same way I would with like City of Bones or Clockwork Angel, just because it didn't resonate with me the same level as those books did. But I would say if you're looking for just a book to get swept away in that's really, really character driven, this is probably the series for you, because there are a lot of characters and they are the beating heart of this book. Alright, another author I have a lot of books from is Brandon Sanderson. I've only completed one of his series, and that is the original Mistborn trilogy. These are, oh my god, some of the best epic fantasy you will ever read in your entire life. This is book one. These are the UK editions because I think they're gorgeous. I do have the American mass market paperback editions that I actually read at the time. Those ones are signed. These are sadly not. But I think these are just much prettier covers. Even though I love Chris McGrath covers. Don't get me wrong. Interestingly enough, in America, the first one is just called Mistborn. In the UK, it's published under the Final Empire. And in my head, I call it the Final Empire. So that's what we're going with. The first one, the Final Empire, is at its heart a heist story. There is an evil emperor. He has been the emperor for a very long time, for a thousand years, I guess. And basically, Kelsier, who is a Mistborn, which is a thing in this magic world that I'll try to explain in a second. He puts together a team to do a heist to take down the emperor. And Vin, who is like an orphan on the street, if I remember correctly, it has been a couple years since I've read it, so if I'm getting small details wrong, I'm sorry. I think I'm right. She's like a street orphan. She gets involved with the gang, and she herself is also a Mistborn. Mistborns are people with the ability to take all the different powers from metals and not just one. There are people, mistlings, who are able to ingest like a metal and have that power, but Mistborns have the power of all the metals, so they're kind of like OP, and it's awesome. And yeah, like this book is, oh, it's so good. The magic system is great. The characters are great. The heist story is great. Brandon Sanderson is great at putting together heists. His YA series, Reckoners, I think is what it's called. The first one, Steelheart, also a heist story, also amazing. And like the tagline for this book, and I always forget this is the tagline because it's not what you're focusing on when you're reading, at least not what I was focusing on, is the idea of like, what if the Dark Lord won? Or what if the same idea, but the prophecy chosen one failed, you know? That's the kind of world this is set in, and it's awesome. Mistborn is a fantasy unlike anything else. The magic system is really what sets it apart because it is just so brilliantly done, and describing it as like ingesting metals and taking their powers doesn't sound as good as it actually is. It's amazing. When I was reading the series, I would have really vivid dreams of being a Mistborn and like flying around the city. Like it's an infectious book, and it is so good. And it is not only a good world building, which he's known for, but I think even more importantly, it's really good at slowly peeling back answers to questions you didn't even know you had. Suddenly, like, a thing has been revealed and it's like a book world changing, and it's so good. It keeps coming at you with the twists and the turns, and I don't know how many times I like screamed at this series while I was reading it, and yeah. I recommend the series for anyone who wants to pick up Sanderson. He does have another major series, Stormlight Archives, that a lot of people pick up. I personally say you should start here. Stormlight Archives are great, but I like these more. I think they're not better, but more immediately engaging. I feel like Stormlight you have to plod through a lot to really get to the heart of it, whereas these are pretty upfront with it. I would also recommend it for anyone who is maybe not just getting into fantasy, although I think it is a good like break-in book, but people who maybe they've given it a try, read a couple books here or there, and want to have something, you know, different, something that's going to challenge them, something that's just going to shock them many times. I would say go with this series. It's pretty good if you're still new to the genre, but not, you know, maybe a newbie. I don't know if it would have launched my love for epic fantasy so much as it would have just launched my love for Brandon Sanderson. I would also say, if you're looking to get involved with Cosmere, which is his giant expanded universe, Mistborn is, for me, the place to start, because after you read this trilogy, you can read A Secret History, which reveals a lot and will kind of open up the world to you a bit more. It's a great place to start with the Cosmere if you don't want to start on the complicated end of things. If you want to start on the complicated end with things, start with Stormlight, because there's a lot there. But if you want something less complicated, this is the one to go with. Next we have the Caravelle Trilogy, I think is what it's called, by Stephanie Garber. And these are the lovely UK hardcovers. They're just stunning. So this is the series I was talking about in the intro where the author has teased an encore. I don't know if she means one more book. I don't know if she means another trilogy. It's unclear. There hasn't been anything since she teased it. This series also really let me down in the final book. I felt like it had a lot of plot holes. I felt like everything it had been building up to fell flat. Character development was kind of derailed, and all the charm and magic of the first two books, it just didn't do it for me. That being said, I loved Caravelle, and I loved book 2, Legendary. They are some of the most beautiful image-wise, like imagery as I'm reading-wise, books that I've ever read. They're often compared to Night Circus. I personally think Caravelle is better than Night Circus. This is a series that really keeps you guessing and plays its cards close to its chest, at least in the first two. Book 3 kind of threw that away, and I think that was a weak point, but it's neither here nor there. You go into this book expecting one thing, things start happening another way, and then they resolve in a complete third different way, and it's great and it's brilliant, and again, cannot recommend it enough. Caravelle, oh, this is another one that's kind of hard for me to explain. Basically, there's two sisters, Scarlet and Tella. Scarlet is the narrator for Caravelle, Tella the narrator for Legendary, and then they shift on and off for book 3. They both wanted to leave home. You know, their father is abusive, they're not happy there, and Tella is the more dangerous one. She has been writing letters to Legend, who is the proprietor of a magic circus carnival thing called Caravelle. It's basically an experience, and she's been writing, and she's been writing to get tickets. So Tella goes missing. Scarlet, in trying to find her, finds out that Tella is a prisoner of Legend, and so goes to compete at Caravelle. And that's the story. It's her like competing in the challenge of Caravelle to free her sister. It's so good. The real highlight really is just how beautiful the magic and the charm of Caravelle is. The romance is also really good, but I mean, yeah, it's also, you know, this book actually reminds me a lot in some ways of the movie Now You See Me, because that movie is one of those stories where it's constantly telling you something and telling you something, and then somehow you don't believe the thing it's telling you, so that when it's revealed, no, we've been telling you this thing the whole time, you still feel like the rug's been pulled out from underneath you. That's kind of how reading this book feels. So I'd recommend this book for anyone who is a fan of Night Circus. You're definitely going to like Caravelle. Anyone who is a fan of just like being almost tricked and played with while you're reading, it's really fun in that way too. It's not like mean-spirited, but you're gonna feel a little played with in a good way. If you're one of those people who really reads for wish fulfillment and just like escapism, you're probably going to really enjoy Caravelle and Legendary. I didn't like Finale, but I have seen a lot of people who did enjoy Finale, so it is possible that it was just like a me thing. So I would say don't be like dissuaded by my thoughts on book 3. And if there is a 4th book, Encore, that might actually fix all the problems I had with book 3. Who knows? It could be a long con. Fingers crossed. Next we have the Night Angel Trilogy, and you can't really see it because it's beautiful black. This is the 10th anniversary edition, and all 3 books are bound up here. This series is by Brent Weeks, and my god, there are very few book series that actually have me physically throwing a book across the room, but this series did it to me. Not this edition, I would never, because it's just stunning, isn't it? Stunning. This is another assassin story. Basically, I'm just gonna read the inside flap because I don't even know how to like begin explaining the series. For Durzo Blint, assassination is an art, and he is the city's most accomplished artist. For Azoth, survival is just the beginning. He was raised on the streets and knows an opportunity when he sees one, even when the risks are as high as they are when working for someone like Durzo Blint. Azoth must learn to navigate the assassin's world of dangerous politics and strange magics and become the perfect killer. That is not a very in-depth description, but I don't even know how you would go about describing it in-depth without giving things away. And this is a series you don't want to give anything away before you dive into it. It is super intense. The politics are really rich in this book. The magics are really rich and diverse. And oh my god, Brent Weeks, please write a companion or a spinoff, because the way it ended, I'm dying. It definitely ends satisfactory, but it ends with like loose threads that, I mean, they don't connect to the main plot, but they connect enough that you're like, I need to know what happens. Like, what is this thing? What is this thing? What is this thing? So much. I would recommend this to people who like more violent fantasy. It's definitely on that end of the spectrum of epic fantasy. I would also recommend it to people who are interested in more politic heavy fantasy, because there's a lot of that as well as a lot of religious imagery, and the takes on religion in this book, if I'm remembering correctly, are just really, really cool. It is another like assassin learning to assassinate story. So if you're a fan of Throne of Glass, if you're a fan of Assassin's Apprentice, you know, those kinds of books, I would say this is also a series you should definitely check out, because it is another like coming of age assassin story. That's a genre. I've just made it up. Here we have one of the queens of YA. Leigh Bardugo's Grisha Trilogy. I think it is now called the Shadow and Bone Trilogy, and the wider universe is the Grishaverse. This is her only series you're going to see on here, because I have not actually finished the Six of Crows duology. I read book 1, Six of Crows, and I enjoyed it, but I never read Crooked Kingdom. I do plan to. I plan to reread Six of Crows. There's just so much time in between me reading Six of Crows and actually getting a copy of Crooked Kingdom that I didn't remember enough details to feel secure in reading book 2. But Shadow and Bone, this book is amazing. This whole trilogy is amazing. It said that about pretty much every book series on this list. So I don't know if you should believe me, but no, you should believe me. It's amazing. This book is set in a sort of Russian, Slavic inspired world, and honestly the made-up fantasy language that Leigh Bardugo employs in this series is so just like aesthetically appealing on the ear. I enjoy it so very much for that reason. Not just that reason, but that's a major reason I enjoy these books. Basically, there are people in this world who have powers. The 3 types, and the people with powers are called Grisha. 3 types of Grisha are Corporalki, the Order of the Living and the Dead, so Heartrenders, who are like killers, and Healers, Therialki, I think is how you say it, the Order of Summoners, so I don't remember what they all mean, but Squallers, which I think are wind, Inferni, which is fire, and Tidemakers, which is water, so kind of like, you know, benders, and Materialki, the Order of Fabricators. So I don't remember. I think Durists make like physical things, and alchemy make like potiony things, but I don't remember the details there, sorry. Alina is found to be a Grisha, except she has an incredibly different power. She can actually summon light, and it is just an extreme power. She's brought to the little palace, which is kind of like the home for the Grisha and a training ground, where she is quickly befriended by the leader. I think he's the leader, the Darkling, who super enigmatic. We love him. We love the Darkling. Basically, the Darkling thinks Alina is like the chosen one type character, and that's kind of the setup. Oh my god, it's such a good book, and I feel like every book in this trilogy gets even better. Some people were really disappointed with the ending. I personally thought it was the perfect ending. This series also has one of my favorite characters of all YA fantasy, and that is Nikolai. I love Nikolai. I haven't read King of Scars yet because I'm waiting to read Crooked Kingdom. I'm horrible. I'll read it before book 2 comes out. I would recommend the series for, I mean, if you read Six of Crows, you should read Shadow and Bone. I personally think this series is better than Six of Crows. I said it. The Netflix series is coming out next year or in 2022. They've been filming. I think they finished filming. Can we get a trailer, please, Netflix? Ben Barnes is in it. This is a great series, especially if you're looking for fantasy inspired by sort of less conventional places. I feel like Russia and that whole region of Europe has slowly been getting more steam in the fantasy genre, and that like it's inspiring more and more fantasy, which is cool. But you know, when Shadow and Bone came out, I think it was one of the first to really dig into that really rich material. In general, I recommend Leigh Bardugo to a lot of people. Her adult book, Ninth House, I have kind of complicated feelings on, but I still recommend it a lot. Shadow and Bone specifically is really good for people who enjoy YA fantasy. It's also, as much of as it is a fantasy, it is kind of fantasy light. Like there's a lot of magic there, but it's not as in-depth politically as other fantasies, even YA fantasies, could be. So if you're looking for something that's more magic and less maneuverings, this is the series for you. The Lumateer Chronicles, my absolute all-time favorite YA fantasy trilogy. I don't talk about this series enough. I don't recommend it enough. It's kind of one that I don't think to recommend all the time, just because it's not really on people's shelves. It's not something I'm actively thinking about. The first book is Finnegan of the Rock. I'm not even able to explain it very well. It's a very complicated book. It's a very beautiful book. Basically, Finnegans Kingdom, when he was just a child, was attacked, or there was a coup or something. I don't remember the exact details. I'm so sorry. That makes it sound like I don't love these books. I love these books to death. But Finnegans Kingdom is attacked. There's this horrible thing that happens, and his people are split. There are some trapped inside the kingdom, and they cannot leave. There's a magical barrier. No one can enter, no one can leave. And then there are those left outside as exiles, kind of wandering the world. Finnegan begins the book being drawn to a place and to a girl named Evangeline? Yeah, it was Evangeline. I couldn't remember if it was Evangeline or Evelyn. So he's drawn to Evangeline, and she claims that the heir to the kingdom is not dead. So that is the quest of this book, is trying to find the heir, his friend, who was his friend when they were kids, and restore their kingdom and, you know, break down the barrier and all that. And that is the quest story here. It's another book series that I feel like if I go too much in depth, I will ruin it for you, because there's a lot of not just twists and turns, but a lot of really quiet, heartfelt moments that you just can't replicate by explaining it. You have to experience it. In general, this whole series is just full of a lot of heart, a lot of twists, a lot of turns, definitely morally gray characters, and intricate, I don't want to say politics, but like I guess it is politics, but just intricate world politics. Yeah, this series owns my heart. It really capitalizes on the found family theme in a really brilliant way, especially books 2 and 3 for the Exiles and Quintana of Charon. This is one of those rare perfect trilogies and just perfect series that I recommend to everyone, even if you're not a big fan of fantasy. I think you'll really enjoy the storytelling, because the writing is gorgeous and intricate, and you're definitely going to go in really confused and really frustrated, but by the end of the book you'll have gone on such a marvelous journey. You won't be able to look back unfondly. Like this series is an experience, so I recommend it to anyone who is willing to take the plunge. Whether you like fantasy or not, I think that this is a good book series for you. The Raven Cycle by Maggie Stiefvater. I have these books in the box set that Maggie herself actually made. Is it upside down? No. That would have been funny though. The Raven Cycle is another really cyclical story. It's probably the most tightly written series I've ever read. when you get to the last page of the last book, you can directly tie it back to the first page of the first book, and it's just really wonderful in that way. It's one of those books series where not much happens in like a way you can talk about, but a way you can experience, kind of like Name of the Wind, where I could tell you what Name of the Wind is about, but it would sound really boring, and I can and am going to tell you what Raven Boys is about, and it's probably going to sound kind of boring. Yeah, but the description that is given, you know, it's hard to make it sound exciting. And I don't know if exciting is the right term for this series, but the series is very magical. It's very addicting, and it's another series where the relationship between characters is everything to these books. They define the books. They define them as something very special, not just in my heart and on my shelf, but in literature and YA fantasy literature in general. So the book follows Blue Sargent. She is the daughter of a psychic. Her whole family, all the women in her family, they're all psychic. Blue has no psychic ability, and she's brought by her aunt to St. Mark's. Yeah, to go on a St. Mark's Eve kind of thing that they do every year, which is to see the spirits of people who are going to die that year. Blue has never seen a ghost until this night, and she sees a ghost of the boy that she is destined to fall in love with, Richard Campbell Gansey III. She ends up getting intertwined with his and his friend's life, and Gansey is on a quest to find the sleeping king Glendower. I hope I pronounced that right. He's a Welsh king, and it's a sleeping king along the lines of like King Arthur is like the once and future king. Glendower's along the same lines, and Gansey is on a quest to find him. Does that sound exciting? I have a hard time containing myself with these books. I've read them two times, I think, 2 or 3 times. They really are something special and something magical. I've never read another series quite like this one. The first time I read the books was right around the time that book 2, The Dream Thieves, came out, and I actually ended up hating The Dream Thieves the first time I read it. I just did not understand Ronan, who is one of the side characters, one of Gansey's close friends. I did not understand his character at all. Upon rereading it and then reading the series into its completion, I have come to have such major respect for Ronan and for all the characters and just what the characters are doing in the book and how they're working. And yeah, it's really hard to give words to that because it's on such a deep level for me, at least. And we're all very, very lucky, but we have a spin-off trilogy featuring Ronan. The first book, Call Down the Hawk, came out last year, and it's lovely, and I can't wait for book 2, which comes out next year. This is a book series that I don't recommend looking at any spoilers. I don't recommend reading the backs of any of the other books. The flap of the first book is okay, but even if you're going into like book 2, don't just ignore the flap. Just read it. Just read it. You will enjoy it so much more having just the experience. I also recommend reading them all really close next to each other, because being able to experience and involve yourself in the world in as close to one sitting as you can get is like a religious experience, okay? It's just amazing. I recommend this book, again, to a lot of people who maybe don't read YA fantasy that often, or YA in general. I classify it as fantasy. It's probably closer to urban fantasy. It is kind of like a category all its own, because it's not conventional in any sense of the word. Especially the Call Down the Hawk is not, like, it's like nothing else I've ever read. So yeah, I do recommend this a lot to people who just aren't big in the YA genre but maybe want to give it a try, or maybe don't care about like genre conventions and they're just looking for a good book. I would say The Raven Boys is a great place to go for. I would also say if people are tired of a lot of tropes in YA fantasy, Raven Boys is another great one to go with. It's not trope heavy at all. It doesn't defy tropes so much as just ignore them and does its own thing. It's like in its own corner of the bookstore, just like da 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 da, doing my own thing. And it's great for it. It's even better for it. The writing is also just incredibly lovely, so I think it's something that anyone who reads any genre can really appreciate. The Red Rising Trilogy by Pierce Brown. I'm not cheating by putting these 3 on here. I know that he's writing 3 more, but they're technically spin-off trilogy. Even though they're about Darrow still, they're a spin-off. Of that, I have read Iron Gold. I have not yet read Dark Age. I don't even own a copy, which is kind of a crime, but like I don't have a copy yet. This is probably my favorite sci-fi series. I do really love The Expanse by James S.A. Corey, and I think it's amazing, but there's something sort of epic in a different way. Oh man, it's really hard to compare it to The Expanse, but I prefer Red Rising. That being said, I don't prefer the first book. I like the first book well enough. It's a good setup book. It is high-key just Hunger Games meets Percy Jackson in space, and I'm not a big fan of that. I thought it's very like YA feeling. Books 2 and 3 though take it off in a completely different direction. It becomes a really awesome space opera. It's super badass. Calling this like Hunger Games in space is a pretty good description of Red Rising. Basically, the world of Red Rising is set in our solar system in the future, and there's a caste system, and the caste system is based on colors, and people actually do appear differently based on the colors. Our main character, Darrow, is a red, which is the lowest caste, and he is basically a miner. And his wife is killed because she is advocating for more rights and just an uprising against the golds, and the caste. The golds are the highest, and the caste, she's advocating for a rebellion against them, and the caste system in general. She is killed, hung, and he kind of loses it. He ends up also getting hung, but it doesn't take, it doesn't work. It doesn't always work, I guess. That was in real life too. He ends up being basically taken in by a secret resistance organization, and they give him surgery to make him look like a gold. They train him like a gold, and they send him to the premier school for gold youths, where he is going to learn to basically be a warrior and just, you know, the perfect gold warrior civilian. In doing that, he'll be able to overturn the whole government from the inside. And book 1 is him attending that school and gaining his place among the ranks. This is a good book series to get you into sci-fi. This was one of the first major series that I read when I was starting to branch off in that direction, and that direction is still pretty new to me. I've always been a big fantasy reader, but it wasn't until late high school, early college that I actually found a lot of pleasure in science fiction as well. I mean, it fits if you're a fan of Hunger Games. It does have that aspect, but I think that's one of the weaker aspects of the book, and I kind of hate that that's used to describe it a lot, but it is unfortunately very accurate. It's also a great series if you're big into politics again. There's a lot of, not back and forth, but a lot of like complicated relationships, and just a kind of book that you might want to make a chart to keep track of everyone's relationship, especially the further into the series you get. And as much as I love the original trilogy, like I said, I have read Iron Gold. That book is even better. It takes on 4 different perspectives, not just Darrow's, and the world that is built and widened is just so intricate and so amazing to read about. So yes, I would say you'll probably enjoy book 1, but it's book 2 and book 3 where the series really shines, and Iron Gold is also phenomenal. The Strange the Dreamer Duet by Laini Taylor. If you watch my book reading vlogs, you'll probably see that I've actually been reading this duology. I read Strange the Dreamer in like February or March, and then Muse of Nightmares just this month. These books hold such a newly found but important place in my heart and my collection. There's something about the world that's built and about the characters, in particular Laszlo, Sarai, and Theon, who just hold, and actually as every character, I was gonna just start naming every character, but they all just hold a really important place in my heart. The characters are as much a reason to read these books as the world itself. Basically, Laszlo is a librarian. He is brought on a quest by this man named Errol Thane, who is a warrior from this legendary city called Weep. No one has had contact with Weep for generations, and suddenly Errol Thane is here riding up, and he's looking for people to come with to help him fix a problem that his city is having. The problem being that, no, I'm not gonna say. Anyway, he ends up recruiting Laszlo, and Laszlo goes to Weep to help with the problem. The other main character, Sarai, is a child of the gods who once ruled Weep and have been murdered. She is able to go into people's dreams and turn them into nightmares, and once Laszlo arrives, she is immediately intrigued with him because for some reason he can actually interact with her in his dream, whereas other people cannot. Another book series that you should go in knowing as little as possible. It's absolutely magical. Laini Taylor has such beautiful writing and such beautiful world building skills and character building. All around an amazing book series. I'm sad that there's only 2, although the way the second one ends, I can hope maybe someday we'll see these characters again. It's not completely unlike other YA fantasy that I've read, but it is different enough that it feels refreshing to read these books. My only complaint is that in book 1, the relationship between Laszlo and Sarai seems to grow into a romantic relationship like that, and I don't really like love stories that quickly, but I was able to look past it because I was like, it doesn't really matter. That's not why I'm reading it. I'm reading it for just how beautiful everything else is, and their romance is cute and sweet, and I'm behind it. I don't hate it. I just wish it took its time to get there. I would recommend these books. Oh, I think if you like Starless Sea, you'd like this book. If you like Laini Taylor's other series, Daughter Smoke and Bone, another great fit. It's a really whimsical book, so if you appreciate stuff like that, it would also, you know, be a good fit. It's something that I think I would recommend to a lot of people, but not something that I would like necessarily recommend right away. I think it is a really good YA fantasy, and I don't think you need to like understand that genre at all to understand this book. But I feel like, I don't know, I don't think it's like a great introduction to YA fantasy as a genre necessarily. But at the same time, if you want to read this book, just read it because it's amazing. And last but not least, another Laini Taylor series, Daughter of Smoke and Bone. The same librarian who recommended me Iron King actually recommended me Daughter of Smoke and Bone all those years ago. And let me just read you the first line because it made me fall in love right away. Once upon a time, an angel and a devil fell in love. It did not end well. Like, it's so good. You know, it's so good. It's been a long time since I've read this book. I don't remember all the details, and there's no book description. So we're gonna wing it and get as close to what it is as I can. Basically, Karu, is that how you pronounce her name? Karu? She works for Brimstone, and he grants wishes in exchange for teeth. And then an angel comes, his name is Akiva, and there's an ancient war between like angels and demons or something. Or angels and chimera. I'm so sorry, that's a horrible description. Let me check my phone for a better description. Thanks, Wikipedia. The story follows Karu, a 17-year-old Prague art student. Karu was raised by chimera, or creatures that have attributes of different animals and humans. The chimera she lives with demand teeth in exchange for wishes and sends Karu to fetch those teeth for them. While on one of these missions, Karu finds a seraph named Akiva, who recognizes her. Kind of. That's a better description than the one I just tried to give. But the thing is, Seraph and Chimera do not get along, so it's like a complicated, it's kind of a love story, kind of the beginning of something really epic, definitely something really beautiful. This series is really dark and twisted, and or I guess that's maybe not the best way to describe it, but it's kind of dark and twisted. I really love the whole trilogy. Days of Blood and Starlight Book 2 is one of my all-time favorite books. It is so epic, it's so good, it expands the world in this incredible way. Book 3 I really enjoyed. I thought the ending was a bit too open-ended for my taste, but at the time I hated open-ended endings. Now I have a much greater appreciation for them, so I just want to reread the trilogy, and I will be because they're getting new covers later this year, and I fully plan to buy those covers, and I'll probably end up rereading them with those covers as well. Ooh, it's really good. Honestly, anything Laini Taylor writes is really good for fans of Maggie Stiefvater. I think they both have really beautiful, evocative language. I think in a broader scope, Daughter of Smoke and Bone is really good for people who want to stray away from the typical YA books. It's definitely still a very popular series, but it's not, you know, a series that I see hailed quite as frequently as a lot of others. I think if you like, again, Sarah J. Maas's writing, you'll probably enjoy this series as well. If you liked Crescent City, I'd say check out Daughter of Smoke and Bone. In one way, they're absolutely nothing alike, but in another, I think they're actually more similar than you might think. So yes, that is all for me. Lots and lots of series, but really not that many series that I've actually completed. I should have counted. I'll put a number somewhere on the screen how many series that actually was, but yeah, like I said, I have a really bad track record of starting series and not finishing them because I get distracted, or mostly because there's just too many books in the world to read and not enough time. But that is something that I'm working on this year, is trying to actually complete the series I start, and hopefully that'll be a trend that I pick up on and continue. Let me know if you've read any of these books, if you're interested in reading any of these books. I recommend all of these series very highly. I'm at the point in my life where if I don't finish a series, or if I get far enough in a series and I hate it, I just tend to get rid of the books. I don't even bother giving them a second chance a lot of times because I kind of know my tastes well enough now. Follow me on Instagram. That's my book Insta. I post there twice a day during the week, and then I'm around on weekends, but I don't post because it's kind of my days off. And yeah, do not forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more videos. I do have more bookish related videos coming down the pipeline, and non-bookish related videos as well if you're curious in those. Thank you for stopping by. Goodbye V, goodbye everyone else. I am going to go have lunch.